Chad Hasty Show, News Talk, KFYO. Thank you very much for tuning in this morning. We go to the phones. And joining us on the program, GOP political strategist Matt Mackowiak. Matt, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Chad. I'm doing great. How about you?
Doing great. Appreciate you joining us today. Let's start off with some statewide news and some news that broke this morning, actually, just a little bit ago. State Representative Travis Clardy declaring candidacy for the Texas House Speaker. According to the Tribune, he's the fourth Republican now to officially, and I say officially because there's rumors of a lot of other people who may be running, but the fourth person to throw his hat into the ring for the race to succeed House Speaker Joe Strauss. What just your kind of initial thoughts? What do people need to know about Travis Clardy and this race for Speaker of the House?
Yeah, so as you rightly point out, the list of filed candidates has a certain number on them, but the list of candidates who are actively considering running for Speaker is quite a bit larger than that. I think you could probably say there are 5 or 6 people who are filed, and there's probably another 5 or 6 maybe that are seriously thinking about it. So Clardy moved from the latter category to the former category this morning. He's a well-respected member from East Texas, represents Nacogdoches. I think it's fair to say has been aligned more with the sort of Strauss wing of the Republican caucus rather than sort of the insurgent House Freedom Caucus wing. I know Representative Clardy fairly well, and I find him to be a very good guy and a very smart political guy. And I think he represents East Texas pretty effectively. The one thought that comes to mind is, I think one of the things to watch, Chad, is, the makeup of the House Republican Conference in the next legislature. The number of Republicans is going to matter. And it's going to matter for the following reason. If you get to a point where, let's say, Republicans lose, 15 seats, and they go from wherever they're at now, low to mid 90s to high 70s. If they get in that range, it presents a pathway for a coalition speaker, where Democrats and a small group of Republicans elect a speaker similar to the way Strauss was first elected. If instead Republicans only lose 6 or 8 seats, perhaps, at the State House this November, that the pathway is probably not there, and you're going to have Republicans choose their speaker nominee in the caucus, which is the rule the caucus passed at the end of the last legislative session. It's non-binding because it'll be a new caucus that'll be voting. But so my point is, if you lose a larger number of members, there may be a path for someone like Clardy who may be looking at this thinking, he could be a sort of a fallback option where Democrats and Republicans could come together to elect him. Now, I'm not saying I know that for sure. It's possible Clardy thinks he can get a majority of the caucus vote by bringing, rural members together and having that block. He certainly would have a case to make to all Texas House Republicans. But there's a lot going on right now. I can tell you in all the conversations I have with legislators and lobbyists and journalists and lots of people, there are lots of different opinions about the direction the Speaker's race is going. And my suspicion is the field will expand leading up until November, and then it will contract after the November midterms.
Matt, I think you and I have talked about what the U.S. House and what Congress is going to look like a couple dozen times now this year. Yeah. What about the legislature? I mean, because you mentioned about Republicans possibly losing seats in the Texas House. What does that look like? And also the Texas Senate. What are the possibilities that Republicans lose numbers there?
Great question. So this will take a minute to dig into. So on the House side, you have a pretty solid working majority for the Republicans in the Texas House. I think the expectation is, yes, they're going to lose a number of seats. Exactly what the margin is remains to be seen. It could be in that sort of 6 to 8 range or perhaps as high as 15. Those seats are likely going to come in urban areas, right? In Harris County, in Bexar County, in Dallas County especially, where there's a deep concern among Republicans that Republicans could have a real wipeout in Dallas County this November. So that margin obviously is going to matter. The smaller the margin, the more significant the influence of the House Freedom Caucus. It's a very similar dynamic. It would be a very similar dynamic in Texas that we've seen at the national level. The lower your margin, the more effective those groups can be if they hold together. The Senate is a little bit different. Generally, there's been a belief that there's almost no marginal Senate districts in Texas. The only one that's flipped parties recently is when Connie Burton won Wendy Davis's seat when she ran for governor. She's up for re-election. That is a competitive seat for sure up in Tarrant County. Another seat I think that's going to get a lot of attention is Don Huffines' state Senate seat in Dallas, for the reasons I said before about Dallas County. And there's some concern that one or both of those seats could be very competitive. In fact, recently I think that the concern has turned away from Connie and towards Don Huffines among Republicans I talked to. But the other thing, and I'll just say this in full disclosure, I'm working on this race on the consultant side, but Pete Flores has a chance to basically flip Carlos Uresti's state Senate seat in a special election on September 18th. He's running against former Congressman Pete Gallego, who Will Hurd defeated twice. So it's interesting you ask that question because we keep in mind the two-thirds threshold is now down to 3/5 in the Senate to move legislation. So you need 19 votes. They have 20 votes right now. If Pete Flores can win on September 18th, that would basically guarantee Republicans would have 19 votes, even if Connie Burton and Don Huffines lose. So there's obviously some different scenarios there. I know that's a little bit complicated, but you have basically 3 state Senate races, one that's a special election on September 18th, and then 2 in the fall with Connie Burton and Don Huffines that people are watching closely.
You know, obviously we'll talk more about this as we get there, but let's say Republicans in the Senate only have 18 votes. What does that mean for legislation?
Yeah, what it means is if the Democrats hold together, they're not going to be able to pass legislation. It would be similar to the 60-vote threshold in the United States Senate that you'd have on almost every piece of legislation. And if you remember, this is one of the challenges that David Dewhurst had when he was lieutenant governor. The two-thirds rule was in place. Republicans did not have two-thirds, and they had to try to win Democratic votes. They would go after conservative Democrats like Carlos Uresti, perhaps, and others on particular issues. And so part of the reason why the state Senate has been, I think, the most conservative in the history of the state in recent years is because the two-thirds rule was reduced to 3/5, and Republicans were able to do things on a party line basis if they wanted to. Now, there's still, a lot of bipartisanship in the Texas Senate, particularly on less controversial issues. But on controversial issues, whether it be pro-life, whether it be Second Amendment, whether it be significant spending reforms, you can go down a list. There's a pretty sharp partisan divide, and so ultimately, yes, if they had 18 Republicans, let's say Pete Flores loses, and let's say Connie Burton and Don Huffines all lose. You lose all 3 of those. They're at 18 votes. They're going to have to win at least one Democratic vote on any piece of legislation to pass it through the state Senate. That would significantly limit the agenda that Governor Greg Abbott and Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick want to advance in the next legislative session.
How much of the possibility of Republicans losing seats in the Texas House and Texas Senate, how much is due to changing demographics? The midterm elections with Democratic enthusiasm, and then how much of it is also the fact that Republicans have really had it easy as far as being in charge in the Texas House and Senate for so long that they have fought each other more than they've really gone after Democrats. They kind of had more infighting among Republicans than going after the Democrats.
Yeah, it's a good question. Generally, midterm cycles and presidential cycles are very different in Texas. And so depending on the kind of district you're in, if you're in an urban district, you're at much greater risk in a presidential cycle where turnout's higher, where minority turnout's higher. And we've seen that in the last, 2, maybe 3 presidential cycles. I believe the Democrats have won a number of those urban counties. That's what's so unusual about this midterm cycle is it's looking like this midterm cycle is going to look more like a presidential cycle than a midterm cycle, in the sense that the makeup of the electorate and the overall turnout is going to be higher than you would normally see in a midterm. Midterms are generally more about the base, and I think this will come down to the base. But if Democrats are enthusiastic and motivated and turn out, which it appears is a guarantee at this point. The question is going to be, will Republicans do that? And do Republicans really feel like there's, Republican voters, do they feel like there's really much of a risk? I mean, if you're a Trump voter, Trump's going to be president the day after the midterms no matter what. And so you may be sitting there thinking, well, the Congress doesn't matter that much. Obviously, I believe the Congress matters a lot, and of course the Texas Legislature matters a lot as well. So it's a good question. I think to your point, Republicans have been probably more focused on the primary electorate in a lot of these districts, and that will change as this map expands this fall. I also think that some of these incumbents have just not had serious races, maybe ever, certainly not recently, and that's another factor. A lot of times we just look at the national environment. We don't consider the individual candidates, the campaigns they run, right, how they spend their money, how much money they raise, what their message is. I mean, those things ultimately matter a lot, particularly in races where the margin is very narrow.
Matt Mackowiak, GOP political strategist. Tell folks what they can, how they can sign up, one, for your newsletter, and then also what the topic is of your next podcast.
Yeah, we know that Texans out in West Texas understand how big the state of Texas is, but obviously you're not reading every news story that you need every day. And so the idea of Must Read Texas was to take all the news from around the state, put it in an easy-to-read email, and send it to people across the state every morning, every weekday morning. So we have 3,000-plus subscribers who receive it. We have a free 1-week trial if you want to sign up, mustreadtexas.com. My podcast is called Mac on Politics. It's in iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher. We've had all kinds of great guests. Most recent guest is Tony Fratto. We talked at length about trade and the economy. It's a very fascinating conversation. Hope you check it out.
Very good. As always, Matt, appreciate your time.
Thanks, Chad. Have a great week.
You too. That's Matt Mackowiak.